The harsh winds of the Texas Panhandle carried the scent of smoke and loss. As Elliot stared at the wagon filled with blackened remains of her life, all that was left of the farm she and her late husband had built from nothing. The fire had taken everything: the crops, the barn, the small but sturdy house, and worst of all, the future she had planned. Now, on this bitter morning in 1874, she stood in the empty yard of what was once her home, clutching a faded photograph to her chest as she surveyed the devastation. Emma had barely slept for 3 days, not since lightning had struck the barn during the worst electrical storm Dalhart, Texas had seen in decades. The neighbors had come running, but by then the flames had already engulfed everything. Emma had managed to save only a trunk of clothes, her husband's pocket watch, a few family photographs, and the deed to the land. Everything else, tools, seeds, furniture, their meager savings was gone. "Mrs. Elliot," a deep voice called from behind her. Emma turned, her ash-smudged face lined with exhaustion. A tall man on horseback approached, wearing the unmistakable silver star of a Texas Ranger on his chest. His face was shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was watching her carefully, his expression a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Yes," she replied, her voice hoarse from crying and smoke. He dismounted in one fluid motion, the spurs on his boots jangling as his feet hit the ground. "I'm Ranger Clayton Vaughn. The sheriff in town asked me to come check on you." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes were kind. "I'm mighty sorry about your troubles, madam." Emma nodded, too tired to speak. She was 23, widowed for just over a year when Samuel had taken ill with fever, and now homeless. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "The town's taking up a collection," Clayton continued when she remained silent. "Sheriff Pearson asked if I'd stay a spell, help you sort through what's left." "There's nothing left to sort," Emma said, gesturing to the wagon. "Just ashes, everything we built, just gone." Her voice broke on the last word. Clayton looked at the wagon, then back at the scorched earth where the farm had stood. His eyes lingered on the blackened skeleton of the house, the collapsed barn, the fields now nothing but charred stubble. Then he turned back to her, determination settling across his features. "We replant what was lost," he said simply. Emma stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" "That's what my pa always said after a disaster. We replant what was lost." He gestured toward the land. "This soil's still good, the well's intact. You've got your deed, with help you can rebuild." Emma laughed bitterly. "With what? I have no money, no seeds, no tools. My husband is gone, and I have no family left. I was planning to sell the place and move back east before winter sets in." Clayton's expression didn't change. "My assignment is to stay stationed here until you're settled one way or another. If you decide to sell, I'll help you find a fair buyer. If you decide to stay, I'll help you rebuild. Either way, you shouldn't be alone right now." Emma wanted to tell him to leave, that she didn't need his pity or his help, but the truth was, she had nowhere to go. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and she couldn't bear to impose on their charity any longer. "There's a patch of land on the other side of the creek that didn't burn," she finally said. "We can set up camp there for now." Clayton nodded. "I've got supplies on my pack horse. Let's get you settled before nightfall." As the sun began to set, Clayton had built a small but comfortable camp. He'd erected a canvas tent for Emma and set up his own bedroll under the stars. A fire crackled between them, and the aroma of coffee and beans cooking in a cast iron pot replaced the acrid smell of disaster that had filled her nostrils for days. Why would they send a ranger for something like this? Emma asked as she accepted a tin cup of coffee from him. Isn't that usually a job for local law? Clayton poked at the fire. I was passing through anyway. Sheriff's an old friend from the war. Besides, there have been reports of outlaws in the territory. Might be nothing but with you out here alone. He shrugged, seemed prudent. Emma's hands tightened around the warm cup. Outlaws. Do you think they had something to do with the fire? No, madam. Lightning strike was clear enough. But desperate times make desperate people, and a woman alone makes an easy target. He looked at her directly. Which is why I'll be staying until we sort out your situation. Emma bristled slightly at the implication that she needed protection, but she couldn't deny the logic. She'd seen the hungry looks from some men in town after Samuel died, the way they eyed the farm with barely concealed interest. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't mean to be ungrateful, it's just. A lot, Clayton finished for her. I know, get some rest, Mrs. Elliot. Things look different in the morning light. As Emma retreated to her tent, she wondered if that could possibly be true. How could any amount of morning light change the fact that she was alone, broke, and homeless? Yet something about the steady presence of Clayton Vaughn, with his calm certainty, made her want to believe him. The next morning, Emma woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Clayton speaking to someone. She quickly dressed and emerged from her tent to find 3 men on horseback talking with the ranger. She recognized them as farmers from nearby properties. Mrs. Elliot, one of them called, tipping his hat. Heard about your trouble. We brought some things that might help. He gestured to the loaded pack horses behind them. Emma walked forward, stunned by what she saw. Tools, seed bags, blankets, a small wood stove, cooking utensils, even some lumber was strapped to the horses. Mr. Harrison, this is. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say nothing at all, the farmer replied gruffly. Your Samuel helped us all through that drought 2 years back, sharing his well water when ours ran dry, just returning the favor. Clayton stood back, watching as the men unloaded their offerings, his expression unreadable. When Emma glanced at him questioningly, he simply nodded, as if to say, see. This is how it's done out here. After the farmers left, promising to return with more help in the coming days, Emma turned to Clayton. Did you arrange this? She asked. Just spread the word in town last night that you were staying to rebuild, he replied, handing her a plate of bacon and biscuits. The rest they did on their own. Emma sat on a fallen log, plate balanced on her knees, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of neighbors she barely knew. I never thought, I assumed I'd have to leave. Clayton sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Out here we survive by helping each other. That's the code of the West. No one makes it alone. Even so, Emma said softly, rebuilding will take months. Winter will be here before I have proper shelter. Then we better get started today, Clayton said, rising to his feet. First thing is to clear the old foundation and salvage what we can. They worked through the morning, sifting through the ruins of Emma's home. It was painful, discovering melted remnants of her life, the misshapen lump that had been her mother's silver candlesticks, a charred corner of a family Bible, the twisted metal frame of Samuel's reading glasses. Each discovery brought fresh grief, but Clayton worked steadily beside her, respectful of her tears, but never allowing her to dwell too long. By midday, they had cleared a space for a new cabin and salvaged enough nails and hinges to be useful. Clayton had sketched a simple floor plan, smaller than her previous home but sufficient for her needs. We'll start with the foundation tomorrow, he said as they ate a simple lunch. Some of the men from town said they'd bring a wagon of stone. Emma looked at him curiously. You seem very sure of all this. Clayton met her gaze. I've rebuilt before. After the war, my family's ranch in the hill country was in ruins. Then again after my wife died and I took my son to live with my sister. Emma hadn't expected that. You have a son. A shadow passed over Clayton's face. He and my sister's family took sick with cholera 3 years back. I was away on ranger business. He said it matter-of-factly, but Emma could hear the pain beneath the words. I'm sorry, she said, reaching out impulsively to touch his arm. Clayton nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting more. Point is, I know about starting over. It can be done. Emma withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of the impropriety of touching a man she barely knew. Still, I can't expect you to stay here rebuilding my farm. Surely you have duties elsewhere. Captain gave me leave to stay as needed, Clayton replied. Truthfully, this territory's been quiet lately, and I've been thinking of settling down again anyway. Rangering's a young man's game. Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. Tell me what you're thinking for the cabin. As Clayton outlined his plans for a simple but sturdy structure, Emma found herself drawn to the quiet confidence in his voice. For the first time since the fire, she could actually visualize a future here, not the one she'd planned with Samuel, but perhaps something that could sustain her nonetheless. Over the next 2 weeks, the foundation was laid and the frame of a small cabin began to take shape. True to Clayton's word, help came from unexpected places. Farmers and ranchers from miles around contributed lumber, labor, and provisions. The general store owner extended credit. Even the local banker visited, offering a small loan against future harvests. Emma worked alongside everyone, learning to use tools she'd never handled before, her hands becoming calloused and strong. At night, she collapsed into exhausted sleep in her tent, waking each morning with renewed determination. Clayton remained a constant presence, directing the work with quiet authority and teaching Emma skills she would need. He kept his personal distance, always the consummate gentleman, sleeping apart from the main camp and addressing her as Mrs. Elliot, even as others began to call her Emma. Yet she found her eyes following him more and more, noticing the way the muscles in his forearms flexed when he swung an axe, how his rare smile transformed his serious face. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the other workers had gone, Emma finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why are you really doing this, Ranger Vaughn? And please don't say it's just your duty. Clayton was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When I lost my family, he finally said, I had people who helped me through it, even when I didn't want their help. I survived because someone was there to say we replant what was lost, not the same things, mind you. You can't replace what's gone, but you can grow something new. He looked up at her. I reckon I'm just passing along what was given to me. Emma felt something shift inside her at his words, a softening of the hard shell of grief and anger she'd been carrying. And what did you replant, Clayton? She asked softly, using his first name for the first time. His eyes met hers across the fire, and for a brief moment, Emma saw something there that made her heart beat faster. Still figuring that out, he said quietly. The next day brought unexpected trouble. Emma was working alone at the building site, Clayton having ridden into town for supplies, when 3 rough-looking men rode up. She recognized the one in front immediately, Jasper Wilkes, a local rancher who had tried repeatedly to buy her land after Samuel died, his offers becoming increasingly aggressive. Well, Wilkes drawled, dismounting and approaching with a swagger. Heard you had some bad luck, Mrs. Elliot. Shame about the fire. His false sympathy made Emma's skin crawl. What do you want, Mr. Wilkes? She asked, straightening her back and gripping her hammer tighter. Same as always, to make you a fair offer for this land. He gestured expansively. Even more fair now, considering there's nothing much left. My answer's still no, Emma replied firmly. As you can see, I'm rebuilding. Wilkes laughed, a harsh sound that set Emma's nerves on edge. With what? Borrowed lumber and charity. You'll never make this farm profitable again, not without a man to work it. He stepped closer. Be reasonable. Take my money and go back east where a pretty little thing like you belongs. Emma stood her ground. This is my home, Mr. Wilkes. I'm not selling. Wilkes's smile disappeared. Might want to reconsider that position. Accidents happen out here all the time. Lightning strikes fires. He let the threat hang in the air. Emma's blood ran cold. Are you suggesting the fire wasn't an accident? Before Wilkes could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them all turn. Clayton rode in fast, his hand resting openly on his holstered pistol. The tension in his posture told Emma he had heard at least part of the conversation. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said coolly, dismounting and moving to stand beside Emma. "Something I can help you with?" Wilkes's eyes narrowed. Ranger Vaughn. Didn't realize the Texas Rangers were in the construction business these days. "We go where we're needed," Clayton replied evenly. "And right now, I'm needed here." "Just offering Mrs. Elliot a business opportunity," Wilkes said, his tone falsely jovial. "No law against that." Clayton's expression didn't change. "No, there isn't, but threatening a woman on her own property, that's another matter." "No threats made," Wilkes protested, though his eyes shifted nervously. "Just stating facts. Farming's hard work, especially for a widow woman alone." "Mrs. Elliot isn't alone," Clayton stated firmly. "And she's made her position clear. I suggest you respect it." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Wilkes backed down. "Think about my offer, Mrs. Elliot. It won't stay open forever." With that, he and his men mounted up and rode off. When they were out of sight, Emma released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said, suddenly feeling shaky. Clayton's face was grim. "Has he threatened you before?" Emma hesitated. "Not directly. He's been trying to buy the land since Samuel died. Each time I refused, his offers got less friendly." She met Clayton's eyes. "Do you think he had something to do with the fire?" Clayton considered this. "Lightning strike looked genuine, but I'll look into it." He touched her arm lightly. "Stay close to camp. Don't work out here alone until I sort this out." Emma wanted to argue she'd been managing on her own for over a year, since Samuel died, but the cold look in Wilkes's eyes had frightened her more than she wanted to admit. "All right," she agreed, "but I won't be run off my land by threats." Clayton's expression softened slightly. "Wouldn't expect anything less from you, Mrs. Elliot." That night, Clayton kept a more vigilant watch than usual. Emma noticed him checking his rifle and making regular patrols around the perimeter of their camp. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound until dawn finally broke. Clayton rode into town early to speak with the sheriff about Wilkes, leaving 2 of the neighbor men to stay with Emma. She appreciated his concern but chafed at the restrictions, determined not to let fear rule her actions. By midday, the cabin walls were nearly complete. Emma worked alongside the volunteers, finding satisfaction in the tangible progress. When Clayton returned in the afternoon, his expression was troubled. "Sheriff says Wilkes has been stirring up trouble elsewhere too," he reported quietly when they had a moment alone. "Trying to buy up several small farms in the area. Word is, the railroad's planning a new line through this region next year." Emma's eyes widened. "That would increase land values considerably." "Exactly. Wilkes is trying to consolidate holdings before the news becomes official." Clayton's jaw tightened. "Sheriff also mentioned that there have been other accidents at farms that refuse to sell." "You think he's behind the fire at my place?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't prove anything yet," Clayton replied cautiously. but I'd bet my badge he at least knows something about it. The revelation sent a surge of anger through Emma. If Wilkes had indeed caused the fire or even just knew about it, he was responsible for destroying everything she and Samuel had built. The thought that her suffering might be due to one man's greed was almost unbearable. "What do we do?" she asked, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "For now, we keep building," Clayton answered. "Show Wilkes and anyone else watching that you're not going anywhere. Meanwhile, I'll keep digging." He hesitated, then added, "But you should know if I find evidence against Wilkes, I'll have to pursue it officially. That could mean leaving you here while I track him down." The thought of Clayton leaving sent an unexpected pang through Emma's heart. In the weeks since he'd arrived, his steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't realized she was counting on. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That's your duty." Clayton studied her face for a moment. "My first duty right now is keeping you safe," he said quietly. "I won't leave unless I have to." The sincerity in his voice warmed something inside Emma that had been cold for a very long time. That evening, as the autumn chill settled over the land, the workers finished enclosing the cabin walls. It was a simple structure, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but seeing it take shape filled Emma with a sense of accomplishment and hope she hadn't felt since before Samuel's death. "We'll get the roof on tomorrow," Clayton said as they stood looking at their progress. "You'll be sleeping inside by tomorrow night." "We did this," Emma said wonderingly. "A month ago I thought everything was gone forever." Clayton turned to her, his expression serious. "That's the thing about starting over, Mrs. Elliot. Sometimes what you build the second time around is stronger than what was there before." Emma felt the weight of his words, sensing he wasn't just talking about the cabin. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll check the perimeter before turning in," he said, his voice suddenly formal again. "Good night, Mrs. Elliot." "Good night," she replied, watching him walk away and wondering at the strange disappointment she felt. The next morning brought rain, a steady, soaking downpour that prevented work on the roof. Emma and Clayton took shelter in the partially completed cabin, using the time to seal gaps between logs with a mixture of clay and straw. Working in close quarters, Emma became acutely aware of Clayton in a way she hadn't before. The rain had soaked his shirt, making it cling to the broad planes of his shoulders. His hands, large and calloused, moved with surprising gentleness as he showed her how to pack the mixture properly. Once their fingers brushed, and Emma felt a jolt of awareness that startled her. "You're getting good at this," Clayton commented, seemingly oblivious to her reaction. "You're a natural builder." Emma smiled, pleased by his praise. "I've had a good teacher." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued working, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on the tarpaulin stretched overhead. Emma found herself studying Clayton when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly when damp. "How long have you been a ranger?" she asked, partly to distract herself from these observations. "Almost 10 years now," Clayton replied, not looking up from his work. "Joined after the war, needed something to believe in again after all that killing." Emma had suspected he was a veteran. Many men in Texas had fought for the Confederacy, returning home to find a changed world. Was it hard? Coming back, Clayton's hands stilled for a moment. Everything was different. The world had moved on while we were busy destroying each other. He resumed his work. "Rangers gave me purpose when I needed it most, a code to live by." "And now," Emma ventured, "you mentioned thinking of settling down." Clayton glanced at her briefly. "A man gets tired of living in the saddle after a while, starts thinking about having a place of his own again, maybe something more than just duty to wake up for in the morning. There was something in his voice that made Emma's heart beat faster, but before she could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Clayton was instantly alert, moving to the doorway with his hand on his pistol. "Stay inside," he ordered, all trace of the previous warmth gone from his voice. Emma waited anxiously, straining to hear over the rain. After a moment, Clayton relaxed slightly. "It's Sheriff Pearson," he called back to her. Emma joined him at the doorway as the sheriff dismounted, leading his horse under the shelter of a nearby tree. "Afternoon, Ranger. Mrs. Elliot," the sheriff greeted them, removing his dripping hat. "Got some news you'll want to hear." Clayton invited him inside, and the sheriff gratefully accepted, standing close to the newly constructed fireplace where a small fire burned. "One of Wilkes's men came to my office this morning," Sheriff Pearson explained. "Fellow named Carter, says he wants to clear his conscience." The sheriff looked directly at Emma. "He claims Wilkes paid 2 men to start the fire at your place, madam," Emma gasped. "He admitted it." "Not directly," the sheriff clarified. "Carter says Wilkes told them to make it look like lightning wait for the right storm, strike when you were in town. But Carter swears he backed out when he realized you might be home. Says he didn't sign up for murder." Clayton's expression had hardened to stone. "Where's Wilkes now?" "That's the problem," Sheriff Pearson said grimly. "He got wind that Carter was talking, gathered his remaining men and cleared out of his ranch. My deputy tracked them headed south but lost the trail in this rain." "I need to go after him," Clayton said immediately. "He can't get away with this." The sheriff nodded. "Figured you'd say that. I've got a posse forming in town. Could use a ranger leading the charge." Emma felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. Clayton was leaving, perhaps riding into danger, and there was nothing she could do about it. "When do you ride out?" Clayton asked. "First light tomorrow if the rain lets up," the sheriff replied. "No sense tracking in this downpour." Clayton nodded, his expression grim but determined. "I'll be ready." After the sheriff left, promising to send men to guard Emma's property in Clayton's absence, a heavy silence fell between them. Emma busied herself with stoking the fire, trying to process the revelation that the destruction of her home had been deliberate, a calculated act of greed and malice. "I'm sorry," Clayton finally said. "I have to go." Emma turned to face him. "I know, it's your job." "More than that," he said firmly. "What Wilkes did trying to drive you off your land, destroying everything you had, it's not just criminal, it's unconscionable." The passion in his voice warmed her despite her fear. "Will you be careful?" she asked softly. Something shifted in Clayton's expression. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have more reason to come back safely than I've had in a long time," he said, his voice low. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Clayton." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she chose, and gently touched her cheek. "I've tried to keep my distance, Emma. Told myself it wasn't proper, that you were still grieving, that I was here to do a job." His thumb traced her cheekbone, feather light. "But I can't deny what I'm feeling anymore." Emma leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "What are you feeling?" she whispered. "Like maybe I've found what I've been looking for without even knowing I was searching," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "Like maybe we've both been given a second chance." Emma closed the distance between them, her hands reaching up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palm, matching the rapid beat of her own. "I thought I was done with hope," she admitted. "After Samuel died after the fire, I thought that part of my life was over, but then you came, saying we replant what was lost." She looked up into his eyes. "And somehow I started to believe it might be possible." Clayton's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "It is possible," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "If you want it to be." Emma answered by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as months of loneliness and newfound feelings broke through their careful restraint. Clayton's arms tightened around her, lifting her slightly off the ground as he returned her kiss with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, Emma stayed within the circle of his arms, her head resting against his chest. The steady beat of his heart beneath her ear felt like a promise. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Whatever happens with Wilkes, just come back." Clayton pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The rain continued through the night, forcing Clayton to delay his departure. He and Emma spent the hours talking by firelight, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. There was an unspoken understanding between them, now something fragile but precious, a seed planted in the ashes of their respective losses. By morning, the rain had stopped, and Clayton prepared to join the sheriff's posse. Emma stood with him as he saddled his horse, her face composed despite the fear she felt inside. "The roof's nearly done," Clayton said, checking his saddle cinch. "The men from town will finish it today. You'll be inside by nightfall." Emma nodded. "I'll be fine. Just focus on coming back safely." Clayton paused in his preparations to pull her close for one more kiss. "I will," he promised against her lips. "And Emma, don't doubt what's between us. It's real." "I don't doubt it," she assured him. "Not anymore." She watched him ride away, the Texas Ranger badge catching the morning sun as he joined the sheriff and 5 other men waiting at the edge of her property. Only when they were out of sight did she allow herself a moment of worry, sending up a silent prayer for his safe return. True to Clayton's word, the volunteers completed the cabin's roof that day. By sunset, Emma was able to move her few belongings inside, grateful for walls and a roof after weeks in a tent. The simple structure already felt like home in a way she hadn't expected, perhaps because every log and nail represented not just shelter, but community and new beginnings. 3 days passed with no word from Clayton or the posse. Emma kept busy, planting a small winter garden with seeds donated by neighbors and planning the larger spring planting. Each night, she stood in the doorway of her new cabin, scanning the horizon for riders before reluctantly closing the door against the growing autumn chill. On the 4th day, Emma was splitting firewood when she heard hoofbeats. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun, her heart leaping with hope. But as the riders came into view, her hope turned to dread. It wasn't Clayton or the sheriff, it was 3 of Wilkes's men, riding hard toward her cabin. Emma dropped the axe and ran for the house, where she kept the rifle Clayton had insisted she learn to use. She had just reached the door when the first rider galloped into the yard. Mrs. Elliot. He called, and with a shock, Emma recognized him as Carter, the man who had informed on Wilkes. She hesitated at the doorway, the rifle in her hands. "What do you want?" Carter raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "We're not here to hurt you, madam. We're running from Wilkes, same as you." Emma kept the rifle raised. "Where's Ranger Vaughn, the sheriff?" "They caught up to Wilkes yesterday near the Red River," Carter explained, dismounting slowly. "There was a shootout. Wilkes was killed, but he had more men than we expected. The sheriff sent us back to warn you Wilkes's brother is leading the rest this way. He swore revenge on everyone involved, especially you and the ranger." Emma's blood ran cold. Is Ranger Vaughn all right?" Carter nodded. "He was when we left." He and the sheriff were following, trying to cut the others off before they reached Dalhart. Emma lowered the rifle slightly. "How many men are coming?" 5, maybe 6, Carter replied grimly. "Mean ones too. They'll be here by nightfall if we don't get you to safety." Emma glanced at her cabin, the home she had just rebuilt from ashes, and a surge of defiance rose within her. "I'm not running," she declared. "Not again. This is my land. I won't be driven off it." Carter exchanged looks with his companions. "Mrs. Elliot, these men won't hesitate to kill you." "Then we'll have to stop them," Emma said firmly. "You said you want to make amends. Help me defend my home." The men looked skeptical but nodded reluctantly. Over the next few hours, they prepared as best they could, barricading windows, positioning themselves strategically around the property. Emma sent word to the nearest neighbors for help, but knew it might not arrive in time. As dusk fell, Emma moved through the cabin, checking her preparations one last time. The weight of the rifle in her hands felt strange but necessary. She thought of Clayton, hoping he was safe, hoping he was on his way back to her. The memory of his kiss, his promise to return, gave her courage. The sound of approaching riders broke the silence of twilight. Emma moved to the window, peering carefully through a crack in the shutters. 6 men, just as Carter had warned, were approaching from the north. "Here they come," she called softly to Carter and the others. "Let me talk to them first," Carter suggested, moving toward the door. "Maybe I can reason with them." Emma wanted to protest, but she knew a confrontation might be their only chance. She nodded reluctantly, and Carter stepped outside, hands raised. "That's far enough, Fletcher," Carter called to the lead rider. The man halted his horse, the others following suit. "Well, well. If it ain't the traitor himself," Fletcher Wilkes drawled. "Figured you'd run back to town, not hole up with the widow." "It's over, Fletcher," Carter replied. "Your brother's dead. The Rangers will be looking for anyone who continues this vendetta." Fletcher's laugh was cold. "My brother's dead because of her," he snarled, pointing toward the cabin. "And that Ranger. An eye for an eye, Carter. You know that's how it works out here." "There's 4 of us with rifles trained on you right now," Carter warned. "Ride away while you still can." Fletcher seemed to consider this, his eyes scanning the property calculatingly. Then, without warning, he drew his pistol and fired. Carter crumpled to the ground. Chaos erupted. Emma fired through the window as Fletcher's men charged toward the cabin. The other 2 men with her returned fire from their positions, and one of the attackers fell from his horse. But the remaining 5 dismounted and took cover, bullets splintering the wood around Emma's window. For what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, gunfire echoed across the property. Emma reloaded with shaking hands, forcing herself to stay calm, to remember what Clayton had taught her about taking careful aim. Another of Fletcher's men went down, but one of her defenders was hit as well. The odds were worsening. Then, just as Emma was beginning to fear they would be overrun, a new volley of gunfire erupted from the direction of the road. She risked a glance, and her heart soared. Clayton was there, along with the sheriff and several other men, catching Fletcher's gang in a crossfire. The battle was over quickly after that. Fletcher Wilkes, seeing he was outnumbered, tried to make a run for it but was brought down by Clayton's precise shot. The remaining attackers surrendered, throwing down their weapons. When the gunfire finally stopped, Emma rushed outside, her eyes searching frantically for Clayton. He was dismounting, his face grim but determined as he directed the sheriff's men to secure the prisoners. When he saw her, relief washed over his features, and he strode toward her purposefully. Emma didn't wait. She ran to him, throwing herself into his arms with such force that he staggered slightly before wrapping her tightly against his chest. "You're safe," he breathed into her hair. "Thank God you're safe." Emma couldn't speak, could only cling to him as the reality of what they'd just survived washed over her. Clayton held her just as tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, his face buried in her neck. "I thought I wouldn't make it in time," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "When we realized Fletcher had slipped past us, "You came back," Emma whispered. "That's all that matters." Clayton pulled back just enough to look into her face, his eyes intense. "I will always come back to you, Emma Elliot, always." In that moment, with the last light of day fading around them and the danger finally past, Emma believed him with her whole heart. The aftermath of the shootout brought a flurry of activity to Emma's farm. The sheriff's men took the prisoners to town, while the local doctor tended to the wounded. Carter had survived his wound and would recover, though one of Emma's other defenders had not been so fortunate. They buried him at the edge of her property, a solemn reminder of the price paid for her land and safety. In the days that followed, Clayton stayed close, helping Emma restore order to her property and finish the small details of the cabin. There was a new ease between them now, the shared danger having stripped away any remaining pretense or hesitation. They worked side by side during the day and sat before the fire in the evenings, planning and dreaming. A week after the confrontation, Clayton received a telegram from his captain in Austin. Emma watched his face carefully as he read it. "What does it say?" she asked when he finally looked up. "I've been reassigned," he said, his expression unreadable. "There's trouble brewing near El Paso. Captain wants me there as soon as possible." Emma felt her heart sink, though she tried not to show it. "When do you leave?" Clayton folded the telegram deliberately, tucking it into his pocket. "I don't." Emma blinked in confusion. "What?" Clayton moved to stand before her, taking her hands in his. "I've resigned my commission, effective immediately." "Clayton, no," Emma protested. "Being a ranger is your life. I can't let you give that up for me." "You're not letting me do anything," Clayton said with a gentle smile. "This is my choice, has been coming for a while now." He squeezed her hands. "The Rangers gave me purpose when I needed it, but I've found a new purpose now if you'll have me." Emma's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Clayton's smile deepened. "I'm saying that when I told you we replant what was lost, I didn't just mean your farm." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek softly. "I meant our hearts too, Emma. I've been alone a long time, same as you. Lost love, lost family, lost hope. But being here with you these past months has shown me that it's possible to grow something new from those ashes." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes. "Clayton, I know it's fast," he continued earnestly. "I know we're still learning each other. But I also know that what I feel for you is real and true and stronger than anything I've felt in years." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Emma Elliot, and if you'll let me, I want to spend my life helping you rebuild not just this farm, but a future. Together." A single tear spilled down Emma's cheek. "I thought I'd never feel this way again after Samuel died. Thought that part of my life was over forever." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with trembling fingers. "But you showed up at my darkest moment and brought light back into my world. How could I not love you for that?" Clayton's smile was radiant as he pulled her close. "Is that a yes?" Emma laughed through her tears. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding took place that December in the small church in Dalhart, with the whole community in attendance. The same neighbors who had helped Emma rebuild her farm now celebrated, as she rebuilt her life with Clayton by her side. The cabin that had risen from the ashes became their first home together, small but filled with warmth and hope. When spring came, Clayton and Emma planted their first full crop together, working side by side in the rich Texas soil. The land that had once been scorched black now bloomed with new life, corn and wheat and vegetables, plus a small orchard of apple trees that Clayton insisted on planting along the creek. "These won't bear fruit for years," Emma observed as they set the last sapling in place. Clayton straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's the point," he said with a smile. "We're planting for the future, for the decades ahead, For the children we'll have who'll climb these trees and eat these apples." Emma rested her hand on her stomach, where the first evidence of that future was just beginning to show. "Our children," she said softly. "Our legacy." Clayton's eyes widened as he realized what she was telling him. With a whoop of joy, he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back on the ground. "When?" he asked, his hand joining hers over her belly. "Come autumn," Emma replied, smiling up at him. "Just in time for harvest." That night, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors, Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the devastating fire that had left her with nothing but a wagon full of ashes to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed almost impossible. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she answered, leaning into his embrace. "If the fire hadn't happened, you never would have come here. We never would have found each other." Clayton pressed a kiss to her temple. "I believe we would have," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, no matter what path gets you there." As darkness settled over the land that was now truly their home, Emma believed it too. From the ashes of their separate losses, they had indeed replanted what was lost, not the same, but something new and equally precious. Together, they had built not just a farm or a cabin, but a future filled with promise, proving that even from the darkest devastation, new life could emerge stronger and more beautiful than before. Their son, Samuel Clayton Vaughn, was born on a crisp October morning, just as the harvest was ending. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit, entering the world with a lusty cry that made both his parents laugh through their tears of joy. "He's perfect," Clayton whispered as he held his son for the first time, wonder and love evident in every line of his face. Emma watched them together, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "He is," she agreed softly, "and he's just the beginning." Over the years that followed, the Vaughn farm prospered. The cabin was expanded into a proper farmhouse as their family grew. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter, Elizabeth, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. Then twin boys, William and Thomas, who turned their quiet household into one filled with constant motion and laughter. Clayton proved to be as skilled a farmer as he had been a ranger, introducing new techniques and crops that made their land even more productive. Emma, drawing on her own resourcefulness, started selling preserves and baked goods in town, eventually opening a small store on their property that became known throughout the county. The apple trees Clayton had planted in that first spring grew tall and strong, bearing fruit that became the signature product of Vaughn orchards. Each autumn, families from miles around came to pick apples and sample Emma's famous apple pies, turning what had once been a tragedy into a place of community celebration. On the 10th anniversary of the fire, Clayton and Emma stood together at the edge of their property, looking out over the flourishing farm and orchard. Their children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the warm Texas breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emma asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "That day when you found me with nothing but a wagon of ashes," Clayton's arm tightened around her waist. "I hoped," he admitted. "Even then, something told me this land and you were special." Emma turned in his arms, reaching up to touch the strands of silver now beginning to thread through his dark hair. "Thank you for saying those words to me that day, for believing we could replant what was lost when I couldn't see it myself." Clayton caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture he had repeated countless times over their years together, yet one that still made her heart quicken. "Best words I ever spoke," he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Because look at what grew from them." As the sun set over their thriving farm, casting long shadows across land that had once been barren and charred, Emma knew with absolute certainty that from the deepest loss could come the greatest blessings if only one had the courage to start again, to plant new seeds in the ashes of what came before, and to believe in the possibility of renewal. What had begun with a wagon full of ashes had become a life overflowing with abundance, proving that with love, determination, and the support of each other, they could not only replant what was lost, but create something even more beautiful in its place.